Economic Impact Payment Free Stimulus Registration for Non-Tax Filers. We're going to be looking at a tool from TurboTax. TurboTax is owned by Intuit, the owner of QuickBooks. Now remember that TurboTax and Intuit is a private company. They're not related to the IRS, but they've created a tool that can help out with a specific problem with relation to the stimulus package, and they're providing that tool for free. And the main gear of this tool is to provide that information or informational purposes where the IRS may not have enough information in order to properly process the stimulus payments. So we'll take a look at that tool. They also have a calculation tool that you can take a look at over there as well. But just remember, the Intuit is a private company. They're a large private company. They own QuickBooks and TurboTax here, but they're not the IRS. This is just a tool that they provide, and they're currently providing it for free. In essence, this tool will basically file the tax return for you, even if you weren't required to do so, because you're under a certain dollar amount, weren't required to file a tax return, therefore, for informational purposes. So the IRS has that information and can then process the payments. So here we are, the TurboTax website. So it's turbotax.intuit.com/stimulus-check. And I'll put a link to this in the description below. So it says everything to help you get your stimulus check as soon as possible. Again, this is TurboTax owned by Intuit. This is not the IRS website, but they are a large company and they're providing this information to help in certain types of areas. So more than 80% of taxpayers will receive a stimulus payment this year. See if you qualify for a 2020 stimulus check and how much you can expect. We'll also explain what needs to get your payment, which need to get your payment. 2020 Economic Impact Payment. So up top, you have basically a calculator. So this is a tool that you can use for the calculation. So if you just want to know how much your stimulus payment is, you can go into that calculator tool and it should give you an idea of that. If we go down below, what do I need to do to get my stimulus payment? So if you've already filed your taxes this year, sit tight, there's nothing to do. So let's just run through the scenarios here right now, okay? In 2019, if I filed my taxes, well, then they have the information in order to process the stimulus check, you're okay. So what if I haven't filed my 2019 taxes? Then they'll probably take your 2018 taxes, and based on the information they need, they don't need the whole tax return. They don't need to know your net income. They just need certain information based on the prior year, 2018. That may be enough to process the stimulus check, and then you would be okay. But what if I filed my 2018 taxes, but then there are some changes in 2019? Like say you moved or something like that, or there's some kind of change that would affect the stimulus payment, such as another dependent or something that could have an effect on the amount of the stimulus payment. Well, if you moved or something, you can contact the IRS, but if there was an adjustment, then you might want to file your 2019 tax return so that you can make sure that you make that adjustment if there's something that would affect the actual stimulus payment on it. Now, what if you don't have the information to file your 2019 tax return because you're not ready and you've got a Schedule C and you don't have all the bookkeeping ready yet? Well, in that case, then you might want to actually file your Schedule C or file your taxes with your best guess, with what you have at this point in time, in order to provide the information for the stimulus check. And then if you need to make an adjustment for it, then amend the tax return in the future. That's just one option that you can do. So you could say, this is the best I can do at this point. So here it is. And I made my best estimates on it with the information I have. And if they're incorrect, then as soon as you can pull that bookkeeping together, then pull it together. Then they have the information they need at that point. And then you might say, well, what if I don't file taxes because I don't need to file taxes because I make under a certain amount and I don't owe any taxes, so I don't need to file my taxes, so they don't have my information, so they can't send me a check because I don't file my taxes. Well, if you get Social Security, then if you get Social Security payments, then they should have that information and they should be able to process based on that general information. You know, there's an individual filer and we have their information there. So in that case, you should be okay. Now, what if you don't file a tax return and you would like to get your money sooner because they usually send you a check and I need the money now and I want a direct deposit? Well, then you might want to use this tool because then you can give them your banking information so that they can give you the direct deposit. That might be a little faster. And then another scenario, well, what if I get Social Security but I also have a dependent. I have someone that depends on me. And so the IRS doesn't know I have a dependent because I didn't file the tax return because I don't need to because I'm under a certain dollar amount, but the dependent might make it so they would give me a bigger stimulus check. Well, in that case, even though you get Social Security, you might want to use this tool because then you can tell them about this other the dependent or whatever, and then you might get a larger check in that case. Okay, what if I don't have to file because I make under a certain amount and I don't get Social Security? Well, in that case, then the IRS doesn't have your information at all, possibly, and so they wouldn't know to send you a check, and that's when you'd have to basically use this tool. And this tool, so those are the circumstances you'd use this tool, and this tool will basically kind of file a return just to give the information. It'll basically file a return with basically nothing in it if you don't have any income, so that you can give the basic information that they need in order to process the stimulus payment. Okay, so that's the basic kind of scenario. I don't know. Hopefully I did that right and I covered, the basis there. So here we go. If on this side it says if you haven't filed your taxes yet this year, file with TurboTax today to get your maximum refund. So obviously TurboTax is obviously saying as well, if you haven't filed, you can use our TurboTax here. And so it says, and guaranteed stimulus check as soon as possible. Otherwise, they'll use the information for 2018 return to send your stimulus payment. And then we're over here where it says if you don't need to file your taxes this year, if you're not required to file your taxes and don't receive Social Security benefits, use our free stimulus registration for non-tax filers to give the IRS your up-to-date mailing address and direct deposit banking. So again, there's kind of a couple of reasons why you'd want to do this. If you don't file and you're not getting Social Security, then you'd have to do this in order for them to know about you and have your information, be able to mail the check, be able to send it to your bank account. You may want to do this too if they have your information, but they don't have your bank, like they give you Social Security payments, but you want the money faster and you want it routed in your bank account. You might be able to do this and give them your banking information to give them your check sooner. And the other reason you might want to do this is if you have like a dependent. So you're saying, yeah, I get a Social Security check, and so I would be good, but I have someone that's dependent on me, and that could affect the amount of payment that I would get. So that's another reason that you might want to file, basically a tax return in this way and tell them, yeah, it's not just me, I got a dependent, give me a little bit more over here. Yeah. So let's just take a look at it. We'll go through the registration. Again, this is just going to be like an interview process. This is the assumption is that you make below the threshold to need to pay taxes, but you need to give them the information. The way TurboTax will do it is basically sign you up, basically process a tax return. It's going to be a very simple return, hopefully, and so it should be a pretty easy process to fill the thing out. So then it says, do you have a TurboTax online account? We'll help you get started. So I'm going to say no. I'm assuming we don't have a TurboTax online account. Now then we'll set one up. So we're going to set one up here, and I'll just set one up. I'll just enter this information and move forward. Just remember that TurboTax it also owns QuickBooks. So if you have a QuickBooks account, then those things could kind of be linked together. You might have an account with QuickBooks or Intuit through QuickBooks. So then it says, welcome, register for the stimulus payment. We'll gather all the information the IRS needs to qualify you for a stimulus payment. So we're going to say, all right, that's great. Then we have this kind of interview process. So it says, let's start with your personal information. We'll gather some basic info about you and the people in your life. We're going to, all right, that's good. Then we'll get the personal information here. I'm going to say Jane Clark, and we're going to say birthday. Okay, so I filled this out. I'm going to say Jane Clark. This is obviously, just mock information. Date of birth, I'm going to say 9/15/1968. Social Security number here, I'm going to say retired. Let's actually bring the date of birth to 1950. And then I'm going to say retired. And then I'm going to say I am a member or former member of the U.S. Armed Forces. I'm going to say no for this example. Obviously, if you are, I could check yes there. Thank you for your service. And then number 2 says, tell us the state or states you lived in. I'm not sure exactly why they need this for the federal return to be processing this. But in any case, I'm going to say California for our example. I lived in it in another state in 2019. I'm going to say no. And usually that has to do with residency. Are you a resident of what state? Again, I don't think they really need it for the federal tax But in any case, number 3, a few other things we need to know. Someone else can claim me as a dependent on their tax return. So if someone else can claim you as a dependent, then you typically can't do this, because someone else it'll typically disqualify you, right? Because then you'd be a dependent on their tax return, and that would be contributing to their stimulus payments. So in that case, if you were a dependent on someone else's tax return, and you can learn more about this here if you want to learn more, but if you're a dependent on someone else's tax return, you want to make sure, typically the thing I would suggest is make sure that they filed the tax return and have included you as the dependent, so that you're getting the benefit of that on the taxes. So if no, then I'm going to say no here. I was considered legally blind as of December 31st, 2019. So again, I'm going to assume no here, but if you want more information on that, it can have an effect on basically the tax calculations. On your normal tax return, they would need to do that when you're filing the 1040 because of the standard deduction. Okay, I'm preparing this return for someone who has passed away. So in this case, again, I'm going to say no. And so I'm going to continue then. Then it says, select an answer below and we'll recommend the best filing status later. So on December 31st, you were December 31st, 2019. I'm going to select this single filing status because that's just going to be the easiest to process this through. If you select married, then of course, then you're going to have your spouse, and you'll have to enter basically the same information we just entered for your spouse as well. And then so on and so forth. Normally the marital statuses you're going to pick are usually going to be single, married, or possibly head of household. So just be aware of that. So in registered domestic partnership, divorced, legally separated, widow or widower, and so that could be a situation in a widow or widower situation as well. But single, married, two common filing statuses. So I'm going to continue. Do you have children or support another person? They're a big part of your life, so let's see if they'll qualify as a dependent and help get you certified tax break this year. Even if you're not sure you support someone, select yes, and we'll walk you through it with the figure it out together. So they're looking for the dependents here. Do you have a dependent in here? So if you're not filing the tax return, do you have the dependent? So let's just say yes, and then I might come back in and change it just to see what they do. So if I say yes, we support a dependent, and then we continue on this, it says, we'll ask about the people you support. So is it a child, another person? I don't support anyone. So I'm going to say it's a child, and then I'll say next. And then we can have the name of the child here. So let's say, so I'm just going to put a name here. So Tim, I'm going to say Smith, date of birth, and then citizen, U.S. citizen, I'm going to say, and this child I'm going to say is a son. I'm going to say adopted, we'll say adopted, and then let's say continue. So then it says time lived with you. So that's going to be one of the qualifications typically for a dependent. I'm going to say for the entire year. So you can select the entire year or some other component. And then months in the U.S., once again, I'm going to select the entire year. And so I'm going to continue, and you can select these items for more information in case you say, well, they were away for this reason or that reason, and you want to look into more information on those types of circumstances. So I'm going to say continue. Do any of these apply? Disabled, passed away in 2019, none of these. So I'm going to say nope, none of those apply. And then it says, let us know if Tim is one of the few kids who pay for more than half of their living. So usually that would be no, unless they've got some kind of strange circumstance where they're going to pay for more. Obviously, that's going to be one of the conditions of a dependent here. So they're trying to see if it's a dependent. So typically, one of the conditions is you pay for more than half of the living of the dependent. So I'm going to say next, and then it says, do you have an agreement with Tim's other parent about who can claim him? Example of an agreement about who can claim Tim as a dependent include divorce decrees, form 8332, or written or verbal agreement. So we could say, yes, I have an agreement with Tim's parent. No, I don't have an agreement with the parent. So one of the things, of course, if you're single and there's someone else that could possibly claim as a dependent, the IRS is worried that two people are going to claim and get the tax benefit. Both of them try to claim the tax benefit, and that of course causes problems with it. So you can look into if that's a situation that applies to you. You can look into that. The typical thing is that one of the two, through some agreement, hopefully have determined that they're going to claim as a dependent. And so that hopefully that will be known. Is Tim's other parent claiming Tim for your legal agreement? And I'm going to say no in this case, because if they were, then we've got an issue in terms of Tim being on 2 tax returns and causing a tax benefit in 2 places, and that will be a problem for the IRS. Continue. Did a relative live in your home and help support Tim? Tell us if a relative of Tim's lived in your home for more than half of 2019 and helped to financially support him. Again, I'm going to say no. This is kind of going to the support test to see if Tim is actually a dependent. So I'm going to say no, which would be more likely that they would be a dependent. It says good. Tim qualifies as a dependent. So great. So now the dependency should affect the stimulus payment. So that's one of the things that you might want to go through if you have a question. If you do not file a tax return, you get Social Security, and you and then you have a dependent. Then that's one of the things that you might want to go through this to consider, because it does have an effect on the stimulus payment, I believe. So now let's gather Tim's Social Security number. So Social Security number, I'm going to say. All right, Social Security number. Tim's Social Security is not valid. For employment. This is not common. Okay, I'm going to say no, and I'm going to continue. There's a Social Security, your children, and other support. Here's where you can add, edit, or delete any of the dependents. So if you had multiple dependents, you can add more dependents here, and then you can edit the dependent if you want to go back in here and edit the dependent. So we're going to say, no, that's it, just Tim, that's it. So then we're going to put our home here, and I'm just going to put a random address. So 14175 Mulholland Drive. And that's going to be in Beverly Hills. And I'm going to say California 90210. That home is for sale, by the way, if you're interested in it, in Beverly Hills, 17 million or so. Any case, we're going to go continue, so mock home here for our example problem. And then, did you make money in any other states? This helps us know if you need to file a state return for this income. So again, I'm not sure exactly why they need to file a state return, because you're trying to do a federal, but whatever. So the TurboTax is trying to file the return, so that's fine. So here we go. Here are some examples of what counts as making money in other states. Living in one state and working in another, owning and inheriting a business, selling a home, gambling. So it says, yes, I made money in states other than California. I'm going to say no money other than California. Let's keep things simple here. Did you pay more than half the cost to keep up your home in 2019? Upkeep includes rent, mortgage, interest, repairs, food, eaten at home, and so on. So what they're I believe what they're trying to get to here is, are you a dependent of someone else, right? If you paid more than half, then that would mean you're self-sufficient and therefore not a dependent of someone else. And that would, if you're a dependent of someone else, you may not be qualified at least for the payment. So if you're not a dependent of someone else, so I'm going to say no. Someone else paid. I'm just going to say yes. I paid more than half of the cost. So I paid more than half the cost of my household. So I'm going to say, all right, continue. Here's the best filing status for you, and we have the head of household. So head of household filing status, and that's because we have the single individual, right? And then now we have a dependent. So so that's going to be the head of household filing status. Now, I don't think the status of the head of household is the affecting factor on the stimulus payment. What you're really looking for with the stimulus payment is, the individual, yourself, and a dependent, right? So in other words, if they filed it as single versus head of household, married would make a difference because now you have the 2 individuals. But in any case, head of household. So, and then you can then check that if you want to be checking that. Again, the main thing for the stimulus check is, well, now I have myself and I have the dependent. Those are going to be the factors typically that will affect, the check, you would think. And so head of household automatically saves you the most on taxes. So, but obviously we're not paying taxes because we're under the threshold to pay taxes in any case. So you qualify for this because you weren't married and because Tim made you eligible for this filing status. All right, great. Here's what you also checked. Here's what you also checked for: single, married filing joint, qualified widow, Did that help explain why? I'm going to say, sure, that is helpful. So I'm going to say continue. And then personal information. So here's the information. You can edit it if you so choose at this point. If you want to review it, you can go back into it. Status here, marital status is single, head of household filing status. That's good. Tim Smith, that's the dependent. That looks good. Add a dependent, no. Mailing address, 90210. All right. Other state, no. Okay, so we're going to continue there. Then it says, we need to make sure, do you plan to file a full 2019 federal tax return? So notice again, what they're doing here is they're basically going to file a tax return with with zeros on it, so that the IRS has this information, which will not be used typically to pay taxes, but to give the stimulus package based on yourself and the dependent in our case. And they're saying, hey, if you're filing a 2019 tax return, that's not really what the purpose of this thing is. Notice they didn't ask you for wages or anything like that. They're using basically a tax return with a $1 in it or something, so that they could then give the information, because typically this is used for people that aren't filing the tax return but need the stimulus payment. If you want to file the 2019 tax return, then you might want to use their other, their tax preparation process. Okay, so important. By registering for the stimulus, we're filing a minimum tax return on your behalf with the IRS. You can't submit both a stimulus registration and full tax return. So they're basically saying, hey, this is not a full tax return, even though we're in essence filing a tax return, because we didn't ask you about any of your actual revenue, because we're assuming that you don't have the revenue to need to file the tax return, and this is just an informational purpose, even though it's basically going to be kind of like a tax return. So, okay, I don't meet the minimum requirements to file a tax return. I'm registering to get my stimulus payment. That's what we would assume to be the case. I agree to have you submit a minimal tax return document on my behalf. So just give them a tax return with whatever minimal information they need. Basically, this is my interpretation of it, because I don't file a tax return. So, do what you need to do to do that. Okay, so, and then the second one says, I will file a full tax return. We'll take you to the tax prep so you can file your taxes. So you don't want to check, you wouldn't be here if you were going to check the second one, because then you would want to go to the full tax preparation, and they would have to have more stuff in the interview process, which would include, how much money do you make and whatnot. All right, so then we're going to say continue. See what else we got here. So it says, enter your stimulus payment registration information. So use my info from my tax return. So this is the registration information we filed. That basically they set up a tax return, same information for the registration information. Typically, you would think, right? First name, last name, mailing address, 90210 Beverly Hills. And then now what's not included thus far is the payment information, because if you just did this, you have the mailing address. But what if you're filing this in order to get the direct deposit to the bank, because that would be the faster way to get the payment? Well, so let's see if I go to the next. I'm not actually going to submit this. Hopefully, I really don't. I'm not trying to mess up the system here, but I just want to see where the banking information, because it doesn't seem like we have it yet. So next, let's verify your email. So now they're finally verifying the email. I was wondering about that too. So to help your account stay safe, we're emailing you 6-digit verification code. Entering it below will allow you to confirm you're you. Well, that's great. I want to know if I'm me. Let's go back on over here. This will give me some security about myself being me. Let's see. Open up the email. Okay, so now they sent me, Jane Clark, obviously kind of a mock me, Jane Clark, an email, and I've now verified it. So thank you for verifying your email address. This helps us keep your account safe. And it's like, no problem. So we're going to continue on to that. Again, I'm not going to actually file this. I'm not trying to mess up the system here. Just testing it out. Okay, a few more questions. We need to make sure, do you plan to file a full 2019 federal tax return? So important. By registering the stimulus, we're filing a minimal tax return. So I already said this. I'm going to say, I don't meet the minimum requirements to file the tax return. I'm going to say continue. Okay, here's what I was looking for. How would you like to receive your stimulus payment? Providing the IRS with a direct deposit information can expedite your stimulus payment. If you don't have a bank account, the IRS will issue a check. So again, if you're filing this, even if you had a Social Security, getting Social Security, and you wanted a direct deposit, you might want to check this off, right? And then the next screen will enter your banking information. So that is useful. That's another thing that you could use this for. I'm going to go ahead and hit paper because I don't want to enter the banking information. I just want to complete the process, so it's going to be easier to do that. So here's where they're going to send it. If I say a paper check, they send it to Beverly Hills 90210. So I'm going to say, all right, that's where it goes. That's where I'm at. We need to confirm some info. So we're going to say confirming the info. Okay. It says to submit successfully, the IRS needs to know your adjusted gross income from your 2018 tax return. So your 2018 AGI, adjusted gross income, is unique number on the last year's tax returns. So what tax paperwork do you have? And I'm assuming you didn't file. Like we're saying, hey, I didn't file. If now it's possible you filed in 2018, but you don't need to file in 2019. But it's quite possible as well that if you didn't file in 2019 because you didn't need to, that you didn't file also in 2018 because you didn't need to. So I'm going to make that the assumption. You know, I didn't file in 2018. It's the assumption. Let's take a look at your submission before we file. Okay, I haven't filed yet. That's good. So you can update this info until you file your stimulus payment. Name, address, social security, birth, date of birth. If any of this info is incorrect, go to My Info and update it. We'll use the information you provided to send your stimulus submission to the IRS in accordance with their requirements. And then it says, click here to view, print, or download your stimulus submission. So I'm going to go ahead. All right, let's view, print, or download it right here, right now. I'm going to download that thing. And here's what we have. So we've got the information on top. And then just scrolling through this, there's basically our 1040. Pretty neat. So they basically gave us a 1040 here, right? So here's the name, the address. Here's our dependent with Smith here. And then they just put a 1 and they put it in the taxable interest. So we had revenue of $1, and they probably had to just do that to get this thing working. And then the standard deduction and so on and so forth. We obviously don't owe. I'm back. Sorry, I started choking there for a second. But in any case, we obviously don't owe any tax. So that's good because this is just an informational form. But you can see they're actually filing a tax return. So if you had revenue and you needed to file a tax return, you can't do this because then you'd have wages and whatnot you'd have to file. This is being used. They're filing a mock tax return with no revenue in it so that the IRS can then use that to process the payment. So that looks like it. I'm going to stop there. I won't actually submit this. Hopefully I didn't mess anything up going through this process. So hopefully that's useful.